And now Donald Trump is losing to Joe Biden in 3 polls that say Joe Biden did a better job as president than Donald Trump. And one of those polls includes the Rasmussen poll, which is always considered to be tilted in favor of Republicans. Rasmussen is Donald Trump's favorite poll. And now the Rasmussen pollster says, quote, if an election were held today between Trump and Biden, Biden would win. The First Amendment of the Constitution won when the Vice President of the United Auto Workers reported in a speech in Washington this week that the auto worker at the Ford plant, who called Donald Trump a pedophile protector, is happily back at his job and hasn't been disciplined in any way. TJ Sabula, the 40-year-old auto worker, says he has no regrets for calling Donald Trump a pedophile protector. The Detroit News reports, quote, Trump responded by flashing his middle finger and twice mouthing F you at Sabula. The president also mouthed the popular catchphrase from his days on reality television, you're fired. The United Auto Workers Vice President, Laura Dickerson, said in her speech on Monday, quote, in that moment, we saw what the president really thinks about working people. As UAW members, we speak truth to power. We don't just protect rights, we exercise them. And the label pedophile protector took on new meaning yesterday for Donald Trump, when someone he protected with a pardon was found guilty of multiple child sexual abuse charges. Andrew Paul Johnson is seen here on January 6th when he participated in the attack on the Capitol to try to overturn the presidential election for Donald Trump. He pleaded guilty to federal charges for his participation in the attack on the Capitol. And on his first day in office, Donald Trump pardoned Andrew Paul Johnson, who is now facing the possibility of life in prison in Florida for molesting an 11-year-old boy. Johnson used Donald Trump's pardon to try to keep the boy silent, saying that Donald Trump was going to give him $10 million. Donald Trump has publicly discussed compensating the people who committed crimes for him on January 6th, and Andrew Paul Johnson used that, saying that he would put the 11-year-old boy in his will after Donald Trump gave him $10 million. Though there's a pedophile who Donald Trump protected with a pardon, a pedophile who has proudly called himself an American terrorist, and he really is. And he is a proud recipient of a Donald Trump pardon. Today, it was Attorney General Pamela Bondi's turn to play her role in the pedophile protector scheme that Donald Trump's Justice Department has been running by violating the law that requires the release to Congress of all of the Epstein files, with redactions only for any identifying information about the victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's international sex trafficking and rape conspiracy. We've had exactly 2 attorneys general in the history of the United States convicted of crimes, both of them Republican attorneys general, both of them in service to the criminal Republican President Richard Nixon. Neither one of those attorneys general ever testified to Congress while blatantly and publicly violating the law, which is what Pamela Bondi did today. The law required the Attorney General to hand over all of the Epstein files 54 days ago, and she still has not done that. And so she is breaking the law every day and was breaking the law every minute in that hearing room today. We've never seen an Attorney General willing to do that publicly. And because her position is completely indefensible, she had her staff provide her with a 3-ring binder with idiotic attacks that she could try to launch on every Democratic member of the House Judiciary Committee today, instead of answering any of their questions. We've never seen this before. The Trump cabinet began doing this just this year. This is not what Donald Trump's cabinet did in congressional testimony during the first Trump presidency. This is brand new. And this is the end of the congressional hearing as we knew it, involving cabinet members. What we saw today was not a hearing. It was not anything that the most honorable members of Congress in our history would recognize. It was Pamela Bondi, with the help of the worst writers in Washington, trying to turn a hearing into a roast. She did the lamest possible impression of Comedy Central roast master in chief Jeff Ross with the stupidest material ever provided to an attorney general of the United States to speak in public. And she was stupid enough to do it. She was literally laughed at when refusing to answer a question about the Epstein files. She tried to change the subject to the stock market, and she said the Dow is over $5,000. Those were her words. She apparently doesn't know what stock market numbers mean. And when people laughed at her for saying the Dow Jones Industrial Average is over $50,000, she double underlined her ignorance by saying, I don't know why you're laughing. Congressman Eric Swalwell presented clear and convincing proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump's FBI director, Kashyap Patel, lied under oath and did it on video.
Madam Attorney General, you acknowledged earlier to Mr. Johnson that President Trump was mentioned and the release countless times, you said, in the Epstein files. I just want to play a video, though, for you that I think speaks to the frustration that many of these victims have. Of times Trump's name appears in the files, so it could at least be 1,000 times. Is that right?
The number is a total misleading factor. We have not released anyone's name in the Epstein files that has not been credible.
Director, could it at least be 1,000 times?
We have released every piece of legally permissible information.
Okay,
you can characterize the numbers however you want it.
Claiming my time, Director. It sounds like if you don't know the number, it could at least be 1,000 times.
It's not. It's not.
Is it at least 500 times?
No.
Is it at least 100 times?
No.
Then what's the number?
I don't know the number.
We now know that the number is over 1 million times. Yes, 1 million. Donald Trump's name is in the Epstein files over 1 million times, according to Congressman Jamie Raskin, who has seen the so-called unredacted version of the files. And Kashyap Patel is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of lying under oath about that. And during every presidency in the history of the FBI, except the Trump presidency, the FBI director would be forced to immediately resign once he was proved to have lied under oath, and he would be prosecuted. The Trump administration is now a governmental crime spree from top to bottom, with the masked agents Donald Trump has sent to Minneapolis literally murdering people, which we have all seen on video. And the Attorney General feigned outrage today when she was accused by Congressman Ted Lieu of lying under oath. Congressman Lieu said, I believe you just lied under oath. And Pamela Bondi said, don't you ever accuse me of a crime. Everyone in America has a First Amendment right to accuse Pamela Bondi of crimes. Everyone in America has a First Amendment right in their factories or anywhere else to call Pamela Bondi a pedophile protector. Everyone in America has every right to believe Pamela Bondi is doing everything she can to protect any and all possible pedophiles whose names appear in the Epstein files. Pamela Bondi refused to answer questions about why the names of men listed as co-conspirators of Jeffrey Epstein's in the Epstein files were redacted. Republican Thomas Massie asked her how that happened, and she simply refused to answer. She insulted the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein who were in the hearing room today by refusing to even look at them when repeatedly asked to do so by Democratic members of the committee. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal asked Pamela Bondi, the human being, to apologize to the survivors for having failed to redact their personal information, including their names, while she made sure that the co-conspirators' names were redacted. And that is when we saw that a human being didn't show up to testify to that hearing today, just a Trumpian robot whose handling of the Epstein files has earned her the suspicion of being a pedophile protector, and her refusal to acknowledge the survivors in the room today in any way established her Trumpian level of heartless, soulless depravity. 9-year-old victims, wow. Yes, 9 years old. 9-year-old victims, wow. were the words of a Wyoming grandmother reacting to what she just learned about the Epstein files. That Wyoming grandmother is a Republican and a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Washington Coal Club. She is also the junior senator from Wyoming. The Hill reports that Wyoming Senator Cynthia Lummis now says, "I see what the big deal is about, the Epstein files. 9-year-old victims. Wow. Well, initially my reaction to all this was, I don't care. I don't know what the big deal is. But now I see what the big deal is, and it was worth investigating. And the members of Congress that have been pushing this were not wrong." Here's Congressman Jamie Raskin after his first look at what were supposed to be the unredacted Epstein files this week.
When you read through these files and you read about 15-year-old girls, 14-year-old girls, 10-year-old girls, I saw a mention of a 9-year-old girl today. I mean, this is just preposterous and scandalous.
A 9-year-old girl. 14 wasn't good enough for Senator Cynthia Lummis. She knew that Jeffrey Epstein got out and raped 14-year-olds, but she didn't see what the big deal was about that. The Epstein files that Donald Trump has been trying to hide for over a year revealed a 9-year-old victim. Howard Lutnick is the cabinet member who makes other Trump cabinet members feel better about themselves. Howard Lutnick is the cabinet member other Trump cabinet members can make fun of and look down on because no one bows lower at the feet of Donald Trump than the publicly pathetic Howard Lutnick, who has now revealed himself to be a pathological liar. Howard Lutnick's pathology as a public liar fills him with the same kind of energy and joy about lying that you see in Donald Trump, and the same stupidity. In testimony to a subcommittee of the Senate Appropriations Committee yesterday, Howard Lutnick said that he did what everybody did when the Epstein files came out. He searched for his name. I didn't. I didn't search for my name. Everybody didn't search for their names. But Howard Lutnick does think everybody searched for their names. Howard Lutnick searched for his name because he knew he would be in there. But last year, he knew he'd be in the Epstein files when he told an entirely Trumpian lie on video on October 1st of last year about his very first encounter with his next-door neighbor, Jeffrey Epstein.
So he gives me a tour in the living room, big living room. And then across from it is double doors. I assume it's the dining room.
Yeah.
And he opens the doors and there's a massage table in the middle of the room.
Ooh.
And candles all around and stuff. So I ask very insightful, cutting questions. I say to him, massage table in the middle of your house? How often you have a massage? And he says, every day. And then he gets weirdly close to me.
Ooh.
And he says, and the right kind of massage.
Ooh.
Now my wife is standing here. So she looks at me and I look at her and we say, I'm sorry, we have to go. And we left. And in the 6 or 8 steps it takes to get from his house to my house, my wife and I decided that I will never be in the room with that disgusting person ever again.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I was never in the room with him socially, for business, or for even philanthropy. If that guy was there, I wasn't going because he's gross.
Laughing his way through that story about his first and only encounter with Jeffrey Epstein, which was, of course, a lie. Now the Epstein files show that Howard Lutnick was lying about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Of course he was lying. Howard Lutnick has not been accused of any criminal wrongdoing yet, but he has absolutely lied, pathologically lied, about his long relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, including going to Jeffrey Epstein's island. The New York Times reading of the Epstein files says that Howard Lutnick, quote, interacted with the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein regularly over at least 13 years while they lived next door to one another on Manhattan's Upper East Side. They invested in the same privately held company together, dealt with one another on neighborhood and philanthropic issues and appear to have socialized in New York and the Caribbean. The records show Mr. Epstein at one point sought to meet with Mr. Lutnick's nanny. Mr. Lutnick's name appeared in more than 250 documents in the Epstein files released by the Justice Department, a review by the New York Times found.
You led people to believe that you had cut off all contact with Jeffrey Epstein after the 2005 encounter you and your wife had in his apartment. But as I'm sure you know, the Epstein files show a very different record of interaction. Why do the Epstein files show you coordinating a meeting and planning a visit with Jeffrey Epstein on his private island in December 2012?
Thank you for the question. I'm glad to be here to make it clear that I met Jeffrey Epstein when I moved to a house next door to him in New York, right? And I met him then. Over the next 14 years, I met him 2 other times that I can recall, 2 times, and that is none for 6 years. So 6 years later, I met him, and then a year and a half after that, I met him, and never again. Probably the total, and you've seen all of these documents, of these millions and millions of documents, there may be 10 emails connecting me with him, probably about 10 emails connecting me with him over a 14-year period. I did not have any relationship with him. I barely had anything to do with that person, okay?
Okay, but the question was, why did you plan to visit with Jeffrey Epstein on his private island in December 2012? And Howard Lutnick did not answer that question. The thing about pathological liars is that when they get caught in their lie, they don't then immediately switch to the truth.
Did you, in fact, make the visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies. I had another couple they were there as well with their children, and we had lunch on the island. That is true, for an hour, and we left with all of my children, with my nannies and my wife, all together. We were on family vacation. We were not apart. To suggest there was anything untoward about that in 2012, I don't recall why we did it, but
Mr. Secretary.
I don't recall why we did it. He has a very vivid memory of line-for-line dialogue of his encounter with Jeffrey Epstein that he was so proud of last year, and now he can't even recall why he turned his boat, had his captain turn his boat to Jeffrey Epstein's island, the complications of getting from that boat, that yacht, to the island. Launches had to be used to get them to the Jeffrey Epstein dock. Can't remember any reason why he did all of that. Why did he bring his children to lunch with the man on his rape island, the man who Howard Lutnick said he found so gross?
When you visited the private island, did you see anything inappropriate during that visit?
the only thing I saw with my wife and my children and the other couple and their children was staff who worked for Mr. Epstein on that island.
And you realize that, you know, this visit took place after he'd been convicted, right? I mean, you made a very big point of saying that you sensed that this was a bad person in 2005. And then, of course, in 2008, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution of a minor. And yet you went and had this trip and other interactions.
So after Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of sex crimes, Howard Lutnick decided to bring his children and their nannies to have lunch with Jeffrey Epstein on Epstein Island. Howard Lutnick knew exactly what he was looking for in the Epstein files.
There was, look, I looked through the millions of documents for my name, just like everybody else.
No, not like everybody else. Just the friends of Jeffrey Epstein, like the lying Lutnick.
There's also a reference to the fact that Epstein had expressed an interest in meeting your nanny. Do you know whether Jeffrey Epstein ever met with your nanny?
No, I saw that. I had no idea what that was about. It had nothing to do with me.
No
as far as
interaction
I
at
know.
all with him on that?
No, as far as I know, no.
Would you, Mr. Secretary, be willing to ensure that the file is complete to share with this committee and the Congress your own records, any records you have that relate to Jeffrey Epstein?
I will surely talk about that. I hadn't thought about that. I have nothing to hide. Absolutely nothing.
Howard Lutnick does have something to hide, and he hid it in that testimony. He wouldn't even say why he went to the island. Howard Lutnick is not going to turn over any of his records relating to Jeffrey Epstein. He's going to hide those records.
What questions do you have about Lutnick's ties to Epstein, and should he come before Congress and testify?
No, he should just resign. I mean, there are 3 people in Great Britain that have resigned in politics. The ambassador from Great Britain to the United States, the prince lost his title for less than what we've seen Howard Lutnick lie about.
Carson Ro Khanna revealed the names of very wealthy men that were redacted in the Epstein files for no legal reason other than to protect them. One of those men, Congressman Khanna named, is Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, who has a particularly horrific entry in the Epstein files in an email in which Jeffrey Epstein tells him, quote, "I loved the torture video." Donald Trump was in business with Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem in 2007 to build a hotel in Dubai, a project that has recently been revived by Donald Trump and his sons. Have they seen the torture video? An association with such a person would be impossible for anyone in the American government until Donald Trump came along and created what the dean of American conservative columnists, George Will, has called, quote, a sickening moral slum of an administration. That sickening moral slum was on display in the House Judiciary Committee today with an attorney general preening with juvenile pride at the violations of law she has committed for the sickening moral slumlord, Donald Trump. Senator Mark Kelly will join us next.